to the Dr. Ollie Show.
Federal aviation regulations require compliance flight information science.
Today I am in the city of Orlando, Florida, where everything pretty much happens. I mean, anyone that you could possibly think of. Hey, Disney World is here. You probably have known somebody in your family to travel here at one time or another. And guess what? I decided to bring the show here because we have very special guests that have pretty much made a very successful life for themselves, and be able to do special interviews with special guests that have success stories. And we want to talk to them about what it really takes to be successful. And so come with me as I go to them and we just check it out. Let's go together. Come on, let's go. All right, so here we are. Once again, I'm in the city of Orlando, Florida, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Robert Walker. And so I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone and just let them know who you are. And very seldom do I get a chance to be able to interview a doctor. So just tell me how you actually got that title and what did you really do when you was actually working?
Okay, that's going to take all afternoon, but well, first of all, I'm from Marshall, Texas. I was born June 29th, 1936.
Okay. So that puts you at like, you're 85 or 84?
85.
85, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, I attended Newtown Elementary School, and then I attended Pemberton High School. But while I was in high school, we moved to Nacogdoches for 15 months and then returned to Marshall. And I graduated there in 1951 at age 14. And following that, I enrolled at Bishop College, which was located in Marshall.
Is that the name of it, Bishop College?
Bishop, yeah.
Okay.
It was Paul Quinn. Paul Quinn took its place in Dallas, but it was originally in Marshall, Texas. Mm-hmm. And I think it moved to Dallas in 1963. But anyway, I spent one useless year at Bishop. And then, of course, the second year, I transferred to Langston University in Oklahoma. Another useless year, but, I was 16 then. So following that year, I joined the Air Force.
So why would you call those years useless?
Because I didn't learn anything. I wasn't engaged. I was just there walking around, missing classes and so forth.
Okay.
And I need to point that out because a lot of students do that. Mm-hmm. They go to college young and they don't know what they want to do. And so they don't get much out of it. But anyway, at 17, 1953, I joined the United States Air Force. Probably one of the best things I ever did. Didn't make much rank, but my first assignment after basic training was electronics school. The farthest thing from my aptitude I can imagine. So after about 6 months of that school, I flunked out. And that was a blessing. And I point that out because a lot of times when bad things happen to you, they happen for a good reason. And the future is better. So anyway, after electronics school ended, I was in 1954, I was sent to Hunter Air Force Base in Savannah, Georgia. And I was assigned there to Information and Education Service, but I was specifically assigned to Education Services, which is one of the best things could have happened to me because the whole function of the office was about helping airmen with their educational progress. So I learned a lot about the meaning of education and how to go about getting it. So after that, I was there for about a year in Savannah, and they shipped me to the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base. Well, because the Air Force is the Air Force, they took me out of the education services and signed me to information services. Mm-hmm. which essentially meant working in the base newspaper with some part-time work in the radio station and a little exposure to the newly established television station. So I got a pretty good orientation to how you apply communication skills. I wrote scripts, for the radio. I didn't write them all, but I wrote some. And as I got more experience, they let me do station breaks on the air. So that kind of rounded out my background with some educational knowledge, communication experience. And I stayed in the Philippines, enjoyed it very much, love it. Came back to the States in February of 1957 and finished out my tour of duty at first Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio. And because I had been injured when I was in the Philippines trying to play football, the last few months was at Lackland Air Force Base Hospital. And finally, I was discharged in August I was sent home in July, but the discharge didn't come till August of 1957. By that time, my family had been living in Longview, Texas, since 1953. So I had only spent vacations there in Longview. I never went to school there, did a lot of partying there, but anyway, when September rolled around in 57, I returned to Langston University. Mm-hmm. Had a pretty good year, did better with my grades and was more sophisticated at partying, had a GI check, which made me rather rich on that campus, and maybe I partied too much because of September of 58, when I returned, I don't want to go into the details, but I ended up being suspended.
Oh, so you got involved in some bad activity that put you.
And they never told me what it was.
Now, when you said that you ended up as far as somewhat semi kind of rich or whatever, I mean, what was considered good money at that time?
Well, let me put it in these terms. Before I joined the Air Force with a work-study plan, my room and board was $18 a month.
Oh, wow.
And my father would send me 20. So I had $2 spending money for a whole month. When I came out of the service, my room and board was $40 a month, but I was getting $110 for the GI Bill. So you can see the difference between 40 and 110 was my pocket change. Now the average student, as far as I know, most of them were from Oklahoma and they didn't live far away. Their parents sent care packages. But I would say that an average student probably had never more than 20 bucks a month. And so here I was dealing with 70 or whatever. And so I was having fun.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to avoid getting off on a tangent, but I do have to say the suspension was not related to any particular event.
Okay.
There was a grudge between me and a member of the staff because I partied one night with a young lady that she had a crush on.
Oh, okay.
And that led to some communication problems. And when I went to see the dean, he was asking all kinds of other questions that had nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah.
And the communication broke down, and he wrote me a letter and said, you have to be off this campus by sundown this evening. So, moving forward, naturally I was despondent, but I had a homeboy in Oklahoma City who had a car, and I called him and he picked me up and took me to Oklahoma City. Here's another one of those bad experiences that turned out to be a good experience. Because before Oklahoma City, I had never lived as a civilian in a city on my own. I had been dependent on my father, then dependent on the military, then depended on the GI Bill. But when I got thrown into Oklahoma City, I was almost totally without any place to be dependent on except the military gives you a $26 a week check for 26 weeks. So that was a kind of a crutch in Oklahoma City. But anyway, I took the civil service exam for the post office, passed it, flying colors, and as a matter of fact, I was hired after arriving in September. I had a job at the post office by the end of November, which again made me affluent.
Yeah.
Because the postal worker's salary of $2 an hour plus 10% differential for evening work was far beyond the $35, $40 a week that I would eventually end up making as a dishwasher. So I bought a 1957 Buick in January of '59 and, lived a good life. But I got fired from the post office.
So you always just kept falling into situations and then it's like you get put out the door.
Absolutely, but getting fired was a good thing because it left me without any income, and the only thing I could do was return to school. In the meantime, while working at the post office, I learned that the University of Central Oklahoma, which at that time was called Central State University, was just a suburb of Oklahoma City. I didn't know that when I was at Langston. So I traded the '57 Buick down to a '53 Buick to lower my payments. In the meantime, I had gotten married in February and was living a married life, living off campus. And I enrolled at Central State that summer. I needed 54 units to graduate. They gave me 8 for being in the military. I did 9 that summer and 18 each of the following semesters, fall and spring, and graduated with a bachelor's degree in May of 1960 with a major in sociology, minors in economic and history. Now I'm back to point zero. I have a degree, but no job. And after working 2 weeks in Tyler, Texas at a foundry, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go back to being a dishwasher. So along comes a friend who's running from the law. He had warrants out for his arrest, and he asked me about riding with him. First we considered Wichita, Kansas, but at the last minute he changed his mind and said California. Well, that was like putting a rabbit in a briar patch, because that's where I wanted to be anyway.
You wanted to be in California?
Oh yeah, that was everybody's dream in Texas.
Okay.
To get to California.
What city did you go to?
Pardon me?
What city?
We ended up in Los Angeles.
Okay.
But I only stayed there overnight with my mother's auntie. And then the next day I had a credit card from Phillips 66. I gave him a tank of gas, $20, and I took the bus up to San Francisco where I had an older sister. And she and her husband had just bought a house, and I went to San Francisco and started living with her.
Okay, so let's do this right here then, because it's getting really interesting with everything that you're saying with the direction of how you got to where you are currently now. So we're going to take a commercial break just for a moment, and then we're going to pick back up right there of when you ended up making it to San Francisco. So we'll be back right after this.
Okay.
All right. So we're here with Dr. Robert Walker, and he's been giving us a very interesting story about how he got to the point of becoming a doctor. And I believe when we cut off just a moment ago, but right before we got to the commercial break, you was at the point of telling us how you made it to San Francisco and what took place after you got there.
Well, I arrived at San Francisco broke. I had a process in my hair that had turned red. My shoes were worn out under the bottom. So my very kind brother-in-law, Otis Wesley, took me out, got my shoes repaired, bought me a pair of slacks and shirt and stuff, and I began working at a car wash as a temporary with my brother-in-law. When traffic got good and there were a lot of cars coming, they would call people like me to come dry the cars. I did that for a while, and then I went to work for Safeway, but before I could join the union, the supervisor, who thought I was liking one of the girls that he liked, told me it wouldn't be wise for me to spend my money joining the union because he was going to fire me anyway. So I voluntarily left Safeway. I hated it, by the way. And following that, I did janitorial work.
How old were you by then?
24.
Okay.
Somewhere along the way, I bumped into a high school classmate. He had just left employment with the American National Red Cross as an assistant field director.
Okay.
He told me about that vacancy, and I contacted the Red Cross people, and I was hired and this is like in November, late November. I was hired as an assistant field director and sent to San Diego at the U.S. Naval Station as an assistant field director. Nice town, nice job, I loved it. But while I was there, I was sent to the downtown Red Cross office for some kind of internal training. And I had a supervisor named Mrs. Edith Loach. I'll never forget her. In one of my conferences with her, she said that I seemed very bright and articulate and all of that. So maybe I should consider going to school for a master's degree in social work. I had no idea what that was. I never heard of social work. So since my annual salary for the Red Cross was $4,410 a year, and the guaranteed minimum, if you have a master's degree, was $5,400. Okay.
Yeah.
But it took some wheeling and dealing to get me admitted to a school. I didn't have a high grade point average from undergrad school. I think it was about a C+. So Southern Cal rejected me because the grade point average was too low. But Atlanta University didn't even answer me when I tried to apply to them. But Mrs. Loach knew Percy Steele, who was head of the Urban League and who was one of the alumnus of Atlanta University and a shining star. So she used her connection through him to get a letter of reference to get me admitted to Atlanta. In the meantime, now, the daughter you just met here, Gail, her mother was pregnant with her, and I had sent her to Oklahoma City to wait until I could save a little money to go to Atlanta while I lived in the bachelor officers' quarters and was eating breakfast with the officers at 50 cents. And in the evening, I had a homeboy work in the kitchen that brought me my dinner. And when he was off duty, I would go to the Mexican restaurant and get tortillas and beans. So I winged my way through and saved a little money. So in September of 1961, I jumped on a bus in San Diego headed for Atlanta with a stop in Marshall to meet my wife. And of course, I had a son already by her. So the three of us hopped on a train from Marshall to Atlanta, arrived in the 4th Ward, and stayed at the Forest Arm Hotel. People were very helpful. It was a different Atlanta then. It was totally segregated, and it's not like now. But the Red Cap took me to a cab driver who took me to a hotel where they were very accommodating. And the next morning, I grabbed a local bus, went to the university, and was directed to a lady who owned property. And I gotta say, when I met this woman, Akins was her name. They were a wealthy family in Atlanta. I thought she was a white woman.
Really?
She was black. And so And her brother, who worked for her, looked white also, but I guess he was black too.
Well, yeah, if it's a brother. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's her brother. But at any rate, they rented me a duplex there, not far from the campus. About $67.50 a month, I think, was the rent. No furniture, but they put me a stove in and told me where I could buy a used refrigerator. I used my traveling trunk as a coffee table and probably hung sheets over the windows at first, but I settled in Atlanta.
So let's stop right here and let's see for a moment. So you went from pretty much Texas to California, and now you're saying that you was in Atlanta.
I went, do that again?
So you saying you went from Texas to California
By way of Oklahoma City.
by way of Oklahoma City, and now you're saying that you were in Atlanta. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's take another commercial break just for a moment,
Okay.
and then after that, then we'll pick back up when
All
we come
right.
back right from there. We'll be back right after this. All right, so we're back here once again, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Robert Walker, and I believe right before we left out, you were informing me on we had stopped at a point of when you had made it to Atlanta. So let's pick back up right there.
Okay, Atlanta University School of Social Work is a 2-year program. So in the first semester, after having gotten settled in my apartment, I was assigned to the Atlanta Federal Prison for my internship. And things went okay. I had a friend who also was placed there who had a car. And
So you keep saying had a car. So at this time, you didn't have no car.
no,
Okay.
we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
But I didn't have a car, so he provided transportation. But unfortunately, in the spring of that year, he was counseled out of the program. So that made me have to take the city bus,
Yeah.
which was okay. Atlanta has a pretty good bus system. And I took the bus for the rest of the year. One of the bonuses of being at the prison, I could eat free. I don't know what my wife did when I was going to the prison and eating free, but I didn't have to worry about any meal. I could have breakfast, lunch, or dinner if I wanted to wait that long. But anyway, moving right along, the first year for me went fine. I was elected president of the class and got to know everybody and had a lot of fun. Enjoyed Atlanta immensely. I had never seen such black prosperity. And on Friday night, if you sit upstairs and look down on West Hunter Street, which is now Martin Luther King Drive, it looked like a new car parade. You know, all black people just cruising, you know. But anyway, the program required us to do a 6-month block field placement. Now that's a crisis for me because I got a wife and now 2 children, and I've got to figure out how to do that.
Okay.
So I ended up buying a 1950 Chevrolet
Okay.
for $300.
Oh, wow.
That ran real good until I'll tell you later what happened to it. But anyway, I rented a trailer, loaded up my little plunder, as my mother would call it, put it in the trailer, and took off for Oklahoma City by way of Marshall. My wife, my 2 children. Now the reason this is important, this is 1962. I'm driving from Georgia to Texas, through Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, when people are getting killed. I was so tired. When I got into Mississippi, I couldn't drive any further. My wife didn't know how to drive.
Yeah.
I pulled over at the first open store I saw, and sure enough, it was on the run by an old white man. I said to him, "Man, can I rest out front?" He said, "Sure." So he let me sleep out in my car, you know, to get a little rest. And until the mosquitoes ate me up, I stayed there 3 or 4 hours, no incident, no problem. Got back in the car, drove on to Marshall, stayed there 2 or 3 days, and then on to Oklahoma City. I'll never forget that summer. Booker T and the MGs were playing Green Onions as I cruised between Dallas and Oklahoma City. But anyway, I got my wife to Oklahoma City, and fortunately, there was an apartment duplex next door to her parents. And I got her set up there, and immediately, now I forgot to mention in that first year in Atlanta, while my classmates were all going on vacation, I went to the post office and worked. As soon as I got to Oklahoma City, I went back to my last place of dishwashing employment and went to work. In other words, I had to hustle money all the way through. So I went back and washed dishes for about a month before I had to be in Richmond, Virginia. So in September, I took off from Oklahoma City in my little 50 Chevrolet, driving to Richmond. I got 50 miles shy of Richmond, and my car went dead. Well, I'll tell you right now what it was. It was a timing chain.
Okay.
But again, this is 1962. I'm in the South. It's getting dark. I don't know how I'm going to get to Richmond. And along come a carload of 3 young white boys. I said, oh shit, here come trouble. But it turned out they tried to help me, and when they couldn't help me, they gave me a ride all the way to Richmond to where I was going. In the process of that, there was a service station near the room and board house where I was going to live. So the next morning, I went up and asked them if they could help me go get in my car. Well, there were 2 black men who worked there. And both of them said, sure, as soon as we, have an opportunity to leave here this weekend, the next day, one of them took me to get my car, brought it back to their station. The one that could do mechanical work fixed the timing chain, and they only charged me for the timing chain, not for labor. So my car was up and running. I made friends with the other guy, and that became my weekend activity, ride with him in a wrecker all over Richmond and getting to see all parts of town, learning the town. But anyway, I lived in a rooming house, and that was pretty cool, but all the other roommates were women, and I had a clash with one of them, and I don't necessarily have to go into that, but I decided that I probably need to move. So I moved to the YMCA on 4th and Lee Street in Richmond, and looked like a good idea, except what they didn't tell me was the heat goes off every night at 10 o'clock.
Okay.
And it freezes in Richmond. So I suffered through a very cold 10 o'clock at night till maybe 8 o'clock in the morning before it came back on, but somehow I survived. While I was there, I got a job at the Y as a part-time youth counselor. But my regular daytime job was a social work internship at Friends Association for Children.
Okay.
They assigned me to one foster kid, and that's the first time I'd ever heard of foster care.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got through that, but not without some trouble, because the young lady I told you in the boarding house,
Yeah.
the one I had problem with, took it to the office. And when she took it to the office, the supervisor, I won't call her name, but she recommended that I be eliminated from school.
Okay.
But fortunately, Atlanta University has what they call a fieldwork liaison.
Okay.
And the liaison had just been there recently and had gotten good reports on me. And she couldn't imagine that anything could have made it that bad, so she overrode the supervisor. In the meantime, my father had died back in Texas, and the whole process was aborted 2 weeks early. They let me go so I could go to the funeral.
Oh, wow.
So, me and my little 50 Chevrolet, I jumped in it from Richmond back to Atlanta. Left the car in Atlanta, hopped the bus, and crossed over to Texas for the funeral. And I returned and finished the master's degree thesis I was the first one to finish, so I started helping other students and graduated in May of 1963. Now, I don't have a job, but here's how I got the job in California. I was living in the dormitory. The phone in the hallway rang, and I answered it. The guy they asked for wasn't there. And I said, what is it, can I help you? He said, well, we wanted to offer him a job, Santa Clara County. I said, well, I'm looking for a job. He said, well, when you get back to California, come see me. So this is the end of May. About the 9th of June, I was standing in his office.
Oh, you hurry up and got back over there.
Oh, hell yeah. He couldn't believe it. He said, you just was in Atlanta? I said, I ain't got time for no vacation. And that was the same summer the March on Washington. My classmates were talking about going to Washington. I said, no, I can't afford to go to no damn Washington. So anyway, I needed to get I was still living with my sister, looking for an apartment in San Jose. But again, good fortune, I had a high school and elementary school friend who owned an apartment building. Now, we didn't have cell phones then, so I don't know how all these contacts were made. But I got in touch with him, and he put me at the top of the list and rented me an apartment.
Okay.
And I started working at Santa Clara County Department of Social Service as a child welfare worker. Excuse me. Other than moving a little bit, I moved to Milpitas because I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. He basically evicted me.
Okay.
And so I moved to Milpitas and bought a house through the automobile union, co-op.
This is all still in California?
Yeah, all of this is, Milpitas is a suburb of San Jose.
Okay, okay.
But I was having marital problems, and that broke up the marriage in October of '63.
Back then, how much was a house?
Actually, I don't know the total cost of the house because the way the union operated, you join the union and fill out the application and pay $100 to join, and you move in.
Okay.
My payment was $101 a month.
Oh, wow.
For 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. They had one price at $89, I think another one maybe $130 or something. I took the middle range. But because my wife was deteriorating mentally health-wise, I sent her back to Oklahoma City and gave that house up. And after that, I was in a play. Then I became a disc jockey part-time, radio. But all the time I'm doing day work and social work. Then I was singing with a little band, making a little extra money. And so eventually, the wife that I had sent away called me and asked me to come get the kids because she couldn't handle it. So March 11th, 1967, I flew to Oklahoma City, picked up my 3 kids. I didn't have a place to take them, so my sister in Oakland agreed I could bring them there.
Oh, wow.
And they stayed there a couple of months until I could find a house. I found a house in East Palo Alto, June of 1967. And I'm fast forward because I don't want to get too hung up on detail.
Yeah.
But that required me to drive from East Palo Alto to Oakland to leave my kids with my sister, cross the bridge into San Francisco, because I had switched jobs, to work as a social worker, and then retrace that after work, go back and pick them up in Oakland, and take them to East Palo Alto. That wasn't working too well, so a friend of mine, a young lady who already had 2 kids, older than my kids, we kind of somehow worked it out where we were going to cohabitate. And we did. We moved into a house in Oakland. And stayed in there maybe 2 or 3 months. But December of '67,
Yeah.
we moved to Eureka, California, which is on the north coast, about 300 miles north of San Francisco. And after we got there, both of us unemployed, I finally got a job for the state of California as a psychiatric social worker, and I still had the GI Bill, so I used it to buy a house in the summer of '68 and settled in and as a social worker.
So if you both were still unemployed, then why did you move there?
Huh?
If you both were still unemployed, then why did you move there? What was your main reason for wanting
Well, we had, this is the era of the hippies.
to? Okay.
So we had some kind of notion of we're going to be hippies. Find a place in the country and
Oh, okay.
take in.
Just do something different.
I was going to write a book. I was writing a book called Johnny Banana Head.
Okay.
Actually, it was all fantasy, but we didn't know that. So we took off to do that lifestyle. But it changed because this woman had been to Eureka before, and I didn't know that. So she really wanted to end up in Eureka,
Oh, okay, okay.
but she acted like it was a new town to her at first, before she confessed the truth.
Yeah.
So we went back to Oakland and packed up everything, rented a U-Haul, and moved to Eureka. And I would say we got there in December '67. By March of '68, I had the job for the state.
Okay.
I had already taken the exam
Yeah.
before that. So we bought the house, and the marriage lasted only until October. Now, the reason I'm putting this into the story is this is going to end up explaining how I ended up at Stanford. My kids, I had shipped back to Texas for my mother to keep. And it was bothering me because I wanted to get them back.
Yeah.
So I started applying for jobs in Texas, in that whole region. Texas, Oklahoma, whatever I could find, but I couldn't find anything. So I thought, well, maybe I could use my master's degree in social work to get a job teaching. And that didn't work out. But one university in California wrote me back and said, before we can hire you, you either have to have a PhD or you have to be a PhD candidate.
So that pushed you to go and do it.
Yeah, so I didn't know what PhD candidate meant. So I thought it meant being admitted to a graduate program for a PhD.
Okay.
Well, it means something more than that. I won't get into details. But anyway, I wrote to UC Berkeley, and I wrote to Stanford. The application to UC Berkeley was too late. That deadline was December 15th.
Yeah.
But Stanford was January 15th. And they responded telling me they could accept me. I was shocked. I got no money, nothing. So I wrote back and said to them, I don't have any money. They said, don't worry. And they were giving fellowships out, the federal government was at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they arranged for me to get a fellowship. And once again, I cut back all my expenses, saved up some money, and worked all the way until, I would say, July. Then by that time, I had changed cars and all that. I jumped in my '64 Chrysler 300 and took off for Texas.
Okay.
Had a wonderful summer of '69. I returned to Stanford that fall. Now, most of my classmates were renting apartments and houses. I rented a $40 a month room on Emerson Street, downtown Palo Alto, with no heat, but shared kitchen and bathroom privileges.
Oh, wow.
I applied for an apartment on campus. I got it in the summer of '70. brought my kids back, and proceeded through Stanford. Now I worked all the way, after my first year at Stanford, I did not work.
Okay.
But beginning with the summer of 1970, I worked as a psychiatric social worker for 2 or 3 months at Agnews State Hospital. But in the meantime, they had I've forgotten, under war and poverty, they had an education program that Stanford Research Institute had a research contract with that program, and they were hiring Stanford students.
Okay. Okay.
So I got a job with that program, paid $67.50 a day. Every 2 weeks I was getting a check for $675. So I was rich again. So by the summer of 1971, I was able to buy a new Volkswagen bus. But I also started teaching because that job played out probably about 1971.
Okay. And
I started part-time teaching at local junior college and then half-time at Cal State Hayward. So that by the fall of 72, now I'm doing coursework for the first 3 years.
Yeah.
69 through 72. Then you have to pass 2 qualifying exams, and that brings us up to 1972. I get a temporary appointment at Sacramento State. I'm driving from Palo Alto to Sacramento once a week, sleeping in my van. I only spent one night there, Wednesday night. I would get there in time to teach a Wednesday night class, sleep in my van at a local park, and then the next day I'd teach 2 more classes and head back to Palo Alto. But while I was there, a friend told me about an opening at San Jose State, which would be closer to home, in the African American Studies Department. That lasted until the end of second semester 75. My tenure track appointment was terminated because I was a misfit. I'm not Afrocentric, but I'm teaching in an Afro-American Studies department.
Yeah.
And I can understand it looking back. Well, when that job ended, I went to Cuba that summer. That was 75. Went to Mexico, got back, didn't have a job. But in the meantime, when I left San Jose State, now you talk about close one door and another one open.
Yeah.
I had a fellowship granted to me, postdoctoral fellowship. I had forgotten I ever applied for it.
Oh, wow.
So I was supported 75, 76 with the postdoctoral fellowship. And then 76, 77, I was a lecturer at UC Berkeley 1 year.
Yeah.
And then I was out of work again. I went to Cuba that summer and hung out and looked at, what Cuba was like. When I got back, I got a call from a classmate from high school. They had a temporary opening at San Francisco State in a child welfare training program. And I managed to get that for 2 years till 79. And in the meantime, the tenure track position opened up at San Francisco State. I applied for it, and I managed to survive the competition and was appointed as an assistant field director, assistant professor.
Okay.
In the fall of 79. And I was made tenure in 83, 4 years later. I don't know why they didn't promote me then, but the next year they did, 84. I became associate professor. And then 5 years after that, I was promoted to full professor. That was 1989. And then 10 years after that, 1999, I retired from full-time professorship and went half-time for 2 years to 2001 and was made professor emeritus. And then I came to Florida and stayed 8 months Between August of '01 and April of '02, I had bought a farm in Texas in 1990, and I went and hung out in a motorhome I bought in Florida.
Yeah.
The next 3 or 4 summers in my motorhome. But in the meantime, I had hooked up with a research outfit here in Florida and did focus groups and focus interviews until '06. And that was the end of my work career.
That was the end of it. Wow. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a commercial break just for a moment, and then when we come back, then after that, then we're going to conclude on how you pretty much went from, I guess we stopped in '06, and then how you got to where you are currently right now. All right. So I'm sitting here with Dr. Walker, and we've been hearing a very interesting story of his life and how he pretty much went from point A to point B to be able to get to the point of being Dr. Walker now. But I wanted to go ahead and pick back up with where we was at. You was at the year of 2006. And so just fill me in a little bit on what concluded and what took place after that happened when you got to, as far as I guess you was starting to make up your mind about Florida and you being able to come south.
Yeah, prior to 2006, I had struggled with trying to figure out how to get notoriety through publications.
Okay.
And I had done a lot of research on black music and the message songs. I had published articles, and that didn't go anywhere. And I had spent research time studying colorism within the African-American group, had done workshops, but that ran its course. So in 2006, when the contract with the research firm ended, I was at a crossroads trying to figure out what's next. Well, what happened was a house that I bought in Palo Alto for $47,000 in '73, I was offered $1,150,000 for it in 2006.
Over $1 million. Wow. Okay.
So that's one of those mafia type offers that you can't refuse.
That's right.
So when I sold the house, I got money out of it, but I couldn't afford to buy back. So I had to make a decision to return to the farm in Texas or somewhere in Texas, or come to Florida to be near my younger sister, Gloria.
Yeah.
And I made the Florida decision.
Okay.
I talked to her on the phone one day, and she said she was in the real estate business, and on an impulse, without much deliberation, I said, well, find me a house. Now, while I'm giving this wrap-up, I want to say I gave up the interest in the colorism or in the message in the music. Hip-hop took over.
Okay.
And I don't need to say anymore because the message was no longer in the music. The music was the message.
Yeah.
Hip-hop has stormed the world. But I came up with a new visionary type thing about African Americans that I want to plug in now.
Okay.
The African American as we know them now will transform through evolutionary shifts to become what I call Ebenesians. In other words, the miscegenation, which is a big word in sociology for hybrids, the white-black mixture,
Yeah.
it's been going on since slavery, but now it's accelerating. The black African will disappear, and a new breed of what I call the Ebenezer will emerge. And people will be resisting that to some extent now, but 100 years from now, you won't be able to find too many black people my color and darker because we would have blended into something else. So anyway, when she said she would find me a house, it was simultaneous with me being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So this took place in, let's see, in '06 the house was sold. I had a motorhome. I lived in it for the next year and a half. I finally rented a studio, cost $1,550 a month for 520 square feet. I couldn't go for that when I could come to Florida and buy a house for a lot less and pay cash for it. So it was around April or May when I talked to her. I told her to buy me a house, and by August of '08, I was right here in this house in Florida.
Okay, great.
And I've been here. I tried volunteering here, but the volunteer organization rejected me because I think they were a Christian-based nonprofit. And when they asked me where I go to church, and I said nowhere,
Okay.
that ended that whole process. And I worked with the senior citizens for a little bit here, but that didn't work out. And so I took to fishing and kayaking and going to the beach and doing
Just having the good life.
and doing a little sugar daddy. But now Florida is a good life for a retired person, so that pretty much is it.
Okay, so when we listen to your entire story, and it sounds like as if that everything that you stated, it's almost like things just kind of begin to fall into place. It was like you may be here, and then they just happened to fall in place to get you to the point of where you were. So would you say that all of this right here was kind of destined for this to be the conclusion for you?
Yeah, that's all driven by a philosophy that I heard a preacher in Terrell, Texas preach on called "Don't Quit."
Okay.
If you just keep going, the sun will shine again. A lot of people give up when they face failure.
Yeah.
But whenever I faced a setback, I wouldn't quit. I just kept going. And I don't know, I didn't hear the interview with my younger sister, the realtor,
Okay.
but I'm pretty sure that was a part of her thing, not quitting.
Right.
Just hang in there and keep trying. And of course, beneath all that, you got to have some kind of intelligence and, things of that sort. But that's just don't quit. That's all. Some people quit too quick.
Yeah. You got to keep going. Okay, all righty then. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. As I sit here with Dr. Walker, and you've filled us in on your life story and how you obtained the title of being doctor, as well as your closing words of, I guess we would conclude with saying that you would like to fill everyone in and just let them know that you didn't quit, and so you'd like to encourage them not to be able to quit. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, all righty then. So thank you once again for coming to be a part of the show, and I was so glad to be able to work with you.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir. Okay.
I kind of like that ending, how you talked about the don't give up. Do you think you can elaborate on that a little bit?
He said, do you think you can elaborate a little bit more on as far as he liked the ending of not quitting? And do you think that you could be able to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I could say a lot about it.
Hold on for 1 second.
Okay.
If you can maybe give me like another 5 minutes of just elaborating on, I guess, your motto? Would it be a motto?
Okay, so would you classify it as far as with you saying not quitting, that would be more of your motto?
Yeah, and,
Okay.
and to elaborate on that,
Okay, go ahead.
and it's partly speculation. I was talking to my older brother the other day, and he was complaining about the Jim Crow laws in the South when he grew up. And I was trying to point out to him that was in the past.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, that's in the past, but it's still in my mind. So I think a lot of damage was done to slaves in terms of psychological damage. And they kind of expect the worst. And this is also true for poor white people too. And so at the first sign of discouragement, they assume that the ball game is over and they acquiesce to doing nothing. But this is where willpower comes in, because you have to have the willpower to believe and have the courage to continue. And as the Christians would say, based on faith.
Okay.
You just have to believe if I keep plugging away, this rock will crack.
Okay.
And I just believe it. It's not so much about black people now. See, what people don't understand, there are more poor white people in this country than there are all the black people here.
Gotcha.
So if our population of black people is 40 million, Well, hell, they might have 60 million poor white people.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And they struggle. Poverty is the equalizer. I don't care what color you are. If you ain't got no money, you're in trouble in this society. And I think people give up because they can't see over the horizon. And I don't know how you get that out of their soul. They got people living in Appalachia, living in shacks, living without running water, without electricity, and they're glued to that. I couldn't do that. And so to try to expand on don't quit, it's just that simple. You just have to believe in yourself that you can do it. Now let me say, I want to be careful here.
Okay.
There are 2 billion Christians in the world. So I don't want to criticize that institution. But a lot of people use crutches as a way of quitting.
Okay.
They depend on somebody else or something else or whatever. But what my philosophy is, if you're living in this world, in the secular world, you also got to depend on yourself.
Okay.
You can't give it all to God. You can give God what it belongs to him, but you got to do your part. And that's a barrier that's hard to break.
So what belief are you? What belief are you then? Because it sounds like as if you're not actual Christian. So what belief are you?
No, I'm basically a deist. I believe in God.
Okay.
But I don't accept any of the organized faiths.
Okay. I see.
Not only Christian, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist.
Yeah.
None of that. That's a prescribed program. You're pre-programmed.
Yeah.
I deal with free will.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And so right now we're at a point where you just want to be able to share with them as far as the don't quit. It's more of a self thing that they have to be able to encourage themselves no matter what to be able to keep going. And that's what you did to be able to get to where you are.
Believe in yourself.
As of today.
Human power. Now look, all of this human power is driven by what folks call God. Because to me, God, wherever life came from, that's God.
Yeah.
So, life, God, synonyms. And all you got to do is just believe in your own life. Now, by the way, the highest commandment, preservation of life. If we lose life, it doesn't come back again. Like if we become extinct as people,
Yeah.
game over. You could ask me more, but I don't want to say any more than you asked me.
No, listen, hey, I'm soaking all this right here in from everything
And by the
that
way,
you're saying.
coming from the same family background as you, it makes me a maverick to think this way. Because my entire family is focused on Jesus. I guess you heard about the cousin in Shreveport, Rose.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's an evangelist. My sister's an evangelist. My daddy was a pastor, and my grandfather, my mother was a preacher. So I'm surrounded by people who are believers. Being a non-believer means that you're kind of left out.
Yeah.
But that's just part of the game.
Gotcha.
Somebody has to be outside on watch. Everybody can't be in the house hunkered down. I'm outside on watch.
Okay.
See?
All right, that's good. Okay, so thank you once again for being a part of this show, and just, hey, the ending has, it's like you went from, I thought we was already at the top, and then it's like you went to another level with it just by elaborating on this right here. So I just want to thank you, like I said, once again for just being a part of this show.
You're perfectly welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. This is the biggest exposure I've had on any kind of a cybernetic, connection. I taught school, university, and all that stuff, but this could potentially go international.
Right.
I've never had that before.
Okay.
So I'm thankful to you and your crew for showing up here to do it.
Yes, sir. Well, we're thankful that you allowed us to come.
Okay, for the last time.
All right. All right, there it is.